Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever traveled across the world, prepared to celebrate a loved one, only to realize that your presence wasn't truly wanted? No recognition, no proper welcome, and no appreciation for everything you've done. If you've ever faced betrayal, neglect, or been underestimated by those you care for most, this story will speak to you. In today's story, you will see how one woman faces this exact situation. She arrives at a family birthday celebration expecting warmth and love, but instead finds herself overlooked, disrespected, and excluded. Yet, through patience, intelligence, and quiet determination, she discovers how to reclaim her dignity, assert her worth, and even turn the situation around in a way that leaves a lasting impact, not just on herself, but on everyone who thought they could take advantage of her. By listening to this story, you will gain insight into how to prepare yourself for moments when you might feel undervalued, how to handle betrayal without losing your composure, and how to respond in a way that is both graceful and powerful. You'll learn that true strength doesn't always come from confrontation. It comes from strategy, clarity, and knowing your own worth. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt overlooked, taken for granted, or disrespected by those closest to you? Comment below and share your experience. Let's talk about it, because recognizing these moments is the first step to protecting yourself and rising above them. Now, let's dive into a story of family, betrayal, and ultimate empowerment. You won't want to miss how it unfolds. My knees were stiff from the 9-hour travel, and my hands were still gripping the velvet box containing my mother's necklace as I got off the plane at Fiumicino Airport. Since Harold's death, I hadn't taken a foreign trip, but Corin persisted. "Without you, Mom," he had added, "it wouldn't be right." You remain family. Nevertheless, I had been thinking about that term the whole way over. I didn't receive an official invitation to Raya's birthday celebration in Rome. My son made a hazy promise that I was welcome, but there was no official communication or schedule. Maybe that was sufficient for him, but not for me. I texted Rylesa on the way to my hotel in the taxi. "Hello, sweetheart. I just touched down. What time is dinner this evening?" I kept it upbeat and cozy, just like mothers are supposed to sound. No answer. I placed the sterling silver necklace with a lapis center on the desk next to me after checking into the hotel with a view of the Tiber and carefully unpacking it. My own mother had owned it. She has worn it to every anniversary dinner and holiday supper. Only a month ago, I had the clasp fixed. It might be elegant for Rylesa, I thought. Nothing from her yet. I went through social media and scrolled. A story had been posted by Rylesa 2 hours prior, a picture of a cappuccino from a cafe nearby where I was sitting. "Final touches of planning" was the caption. I'm eager, putting finishing touches to a supper about which I was not provided any information. I took off my shoes and took a seat on the bed's edge. There was a faint hum from the air conditioner. Gazing at my phone, I saw that the message had not been read and that the 3 dots I had anticipated to see had never materialized. I texted Corvin at 5 o'clock. I wanted to check in. "Where's tonight's meal being held?" "In less than a minute," he responded. "Yes, exactly. Lenti or Palazzo, 7 Hawis p.m. I'll see you there." Don't apologize. No recognition of the quiet, just a location and a time. I straightened my dress, got up, and put the necklace back in the box. After that, I grabbed my clutch and headed down to the automobile that was waiting. As I entered the courtyard through the iron gate, the cobblestones were chilly underfoot, and the Palazzo Orente glistened in the gold lamplight. Perhaps, foolishly, I had hoped for grace in the moment by wearing blue silk, a dress Harold had always admired on me, and a pair of earrings that Rylesa had once complimented me on. The maître nodded courteously at me. "Senora Memle, good day." "Alvarin Mersley," I said. "The Crestwood Memle dinner party is with me." After looking over the list, he blinked. "I see a table for 12, but there isn't a person with that name on it." I looked over his shoulder. They had already arrived. I had once hosted 2 of Corvin Rylesa's former college buddies for Thanksgiving, along with her parents, sisters, and other family members. All sitting at a large table under a pergola covered in vines, adorned with white roses and illuminated by floating candles. Before the official banquet with guests and sponsors the following evening, there was the private family birthday supper. I counted 11 chairs and 11 guests, but I went closer. Corin looked up in surprise, but I only noticed a faint smile and no urgency in his eyes. "You made it, Mom." Relasa remained still. She waved and took a sip of her wine. "Sorry," she whispered softly. "We must have miscounted. I'm a fool." Nobody chuckled. Not directly, but I could hear laughter reverberating throughout the table. A waiter showed up carrying a foldable chair. I gave a head shake. "No need," I said. "I won't be here for long." After placing the velvet box on the table's corner next to the unopened bread basket, I looked at Corvin for a while before turning to face Relisa. "Happy birthday," I said. She grinned as though she was unaware of the sting. Before they could react, I turned, my heels clicking on stone with each slow, deliberate stride. Champagne glasses clinked behind me. I didn't turn around. I stopped at the edge of a fountain down the alley next to the restaurant and touched the pendant that was still in my bag. Her neck had never been touched. I took my phone out. I had a contact whose name hadn't changed in 20 years. When he responded, I pressed it, let it ring, and only uttered 3 words: "I require access." Upon returning to my hotel room, I undid the clasp on my necklace and carefully folded the navy silk before setting it on the chair's back. It was too quiet in the room. I didn't switch on the TV. Rather than reaching for the black binder I normally brought on trips, I did it out of recollection rather than habit. Laminated pages, spreadsheets, old calendars from long-gone events, flower palettes for a Nobel Prize dinner, wine pairings for a billionaire's retirement party in Provence, and seating charts for an oil AS's 3rd wedding were all contained within. Slowly, I turned through them, letting the names do the talking. Because I had organized these evenings, nobody ventured to ruin them. A folded letter in the rear pocket caught my attention. It came from Cielo Roma Catering's former director of operations, Margaret Arlotti. She had previously worked as my intern in Boston, tense, astute, and quick with logistics. I had proposed her for the Rome promotion, taught her or served as her mentor. I took out my phone and looked through the profile of the catering business. The following day, March 19th, Cielo Roma was really named as the official vendor for the formal birthday extravaganza. I navigated through their emergency protocols on their website. The last valid, aided secondary contact was used by the system by default if a primary contact did not reply. I entered my previous login information. I entered the portal. It was there. Under the reservation for R on March 19th, a Millie Senior Advisor contingency was still named as the emergency contact for the Mersley birthday gala. They hadn't taken me away. They had taken advantage of my legacy, vendor contacts, and reputation. They also assumed that I would pretend not to notice while seated in a foldable chair. I opened the vendor list by tapping once. The quartet, the wine wholesaler, and the florist remained partners. Everything is still familiar. I selected Edit Access. After that, I grabbed a blank sheet from the binder and started writing line by line. I had always valued conciseness. In my profession, you were more powerful the less words you required to command a room. The message was typed, printed, and signed by midnight. I approached the concierge and asked to use their fax machine. When I delivered the paper to the young woman at the desk, she hesitated but remained silent. I provided her with 3 numbers, 1 for the musicians, 1 for the caterer, and 1 for the floral designer. The sentence was unambiguous, definitive, and emotionless. Kindly cancel Palazzo Oriente's March 19th services. AM is the authorities' emergency contact. She stapled my confirmation receipts, dispatched the faxes, and put them in a clean envelope. After putting it in my handbag, I went back to my room. I didn't give Corvin a call. I didn't have to. Convenience was more important to him than kindness. He allowed me to travel across the ocean and arrive to a dinner where I had no seat, no name, and no welcome, even though he knew they hadn't planned for me, hadn't made room for me, and hadn't wanted me to sit at that table. They would receive a show if they wanted one. I listened to the quiet envelop me like silk as I reclined on the bed. Relisa was probably reapplying lipstick, going over her carefully picked guest list and posing elegantly by candlelight somewhere in the metropolis. However, the communications would begin to come in tomorrow. A wine distributor returning the credit authorization, a florist without a delivery confirmation, and a violinist perplexed by the last-minute release. Just hours before the first guest came, I could picture the bewildered calls, the unanswered emails, and the uncertainty that grew. The holes that would show up in their beautiful night seams. There would be a pause, a murmur, a look from a staff member who had lost their orders, and then silence. Theirs, not mine. The following night, the Palazzo Oriente courtyard was decked up in linen and candlelight, preparing for Rilesa's lavish birthday celebration. However, there was a problem from the start. Their first glass of wine was still unpoured at 7:45 p.m. The young, anxious server who was always checking his watch had taken the place of the sommelier. "What happened to the Rosso de Montalcino?" Rilesa asked, waving her hand angrily. He stumbled, vanished into the hallway, and never came back. After completing their opening sonata, the quartet in the corner stood silently. A cello was zipped into its case by one of them. With practiced speed, another coiled wire. No recognition, no encore. The guests started whispering. I pictured the tightening of Rilesa's smile as her voice fell into that familiar hissed range. This is not acceptable. Where is the coordinator of the event? However, there wasn't. Upstairs, in a cotton robe, the woman they had relied on for years, silently and without gratitude, was drinking elderflower tea and allowing the night to enfold them. The head chef read my note once more in the palazzo kitchen. Only out of devotion to Margaret's legacy had he waited after receiving the cancellation hours earlier. But with no payment confirmation, no management approval, and mounting anxiety, he took the decision. After being wrapped in spun sugar and packaged, the 3-tiered hazelnut cake was wheeled back into cold storage. The pastry chef feigned not to have seen it when Rilesa requested for a preview. Getting up from his chair, Corven pulled out his phone. From my balcony, I could see the movement. He began dialing, then paused. His stance shifted. His shoulders dropped. I could still make out the intricacies, the timing, the disappearing staff, and the moment recognition even from this distance. It wasn't arbitrary. It was accurate. He turned slowly back to the table, his lips pressed firmly together as his face turned pale. He was aware. At last he understood. Low muttering and restless shifting had replaced the sound of forks clinking against empty plates. Visitors were examining their timepieces and exchanging glances with one another that wavered between interest and annoyance. Then Donatel Marsto stood with a flamboyant flair, wearing a gold-sequined outfit and always the first to weaponize boredom. "Does the performance include this?" Her tone was brimming with contempt as she asked. "Sincerely, it seems amateurish." It was not wine that made Rilesa's face flush. She got up fast, attempting to get well, gesturing for someone to mend it. "We're only having a little delay," she said. "Donatel wasn't done, but the wine is on its way. Rilesa, I've attended 5 of your events. For the first time, the employees appear more anxious than the visitors." She sighed loudly enough to ensure it landed as she sat down. Mr. Chilen, Raya's father, pushed back his chair at that point and hurried off in the direction of the service hallway. He came back a few minutes later, followed by the floor manager of the restaurant. For the benefit of all, the manager spoke in English, straightened his tie, and bowed to the guests. "We sincerely regret the disruption," he stated. "The official cancellation of this event that we received this morning is the cause of the confusion." Rilesa blinked. "What cancellation?" The manager pointed to a document in his binder after opening it. Alvarine Mersley, the registered emergency contact, faxed it with complete authority. No one moved for a moment. Everyone looked at Corvin. He stayed seated with his fingers pushed together under his chin and his elbows resting on the table. His voice was clear but low. "In the past, my mother organized world events. High profile, high security. Half of the merchants in this city learned from her. The account still had her name on it. The weight of the admission weighed heavily on the table, and there was a pause. Finally, he looked up into Riles's eyes and murmured, "She had the right. I didn't believe I needed to remove her from the system, so I didn't." And then there was no more applause in Riles's mind. They hadn't always been mean. They had just been casual with me. The kind of casual that people develop when they know you'll always be there, always pay the bill, and always keep your mouth shut to maintain harmony. I recall Rilesa's tight little smirk the first time she called me conventional. It happened at their engagement celebration. I had promised to host a garden lunch with music for just a few close friends. "Thank you, but your taste is more maternal," she said. She extended the term as though it meant plain. Instead, she employed a high-end planner and forced me to sit behind a peony arrangement so big that I was unable to view half of the remarks. Then came the years of civil detachment. When they needed improvements to the house alone to pay for her sister's design course automobile tuition, she contacted. Until the transfer cleared, her voice would chirp charmingly each time. Then there was quiet. No cards of gratitude, no trips. Corin was no better. I saved some of my retirement money for something special after Harold's death. Visit a conservatory, perhaps, for a must-see bistro project in Providence. Corin requested to borrow it. He called me his first investor, showed me the renderings, and even brought me a chef's autographed apron. In 9 months, the establishment closed. He didn't mention the money again, and since I had already done that, I let it go. I gave it up. I didn't feel retaliatory, though, as word got out from table to table tonight that the birthday meal had fallen apart under my silent direction. I was conscious. I had spent years instructing others on how to establish tables where everyone felt valued and included. However, I was handled like a foldable chair that they might forget about or set up at the last minute. This has nothing to do with revenge. They had covered me with a linen cloth, and it was time to come out. I didn't have to speak louder. I was only beginning to raise myself, and I had done it at last. I discovered a tiny envelope nestled amid grocery flyers and energy bills 2 weeks after I got back to Rhode Island. The handwriting, which seemed to be trying too hard to be pleasant, was familiar, round, and cautious. Relea sent it. A late birthday card with gold letters and all flowers inside. I slowly opened it, half expecting an apologetic note. Rather, a $5 Starbucks gift card appeared, and someone had scrawled, "Wishing you joy," above the printed text. Again, "Thank you for attending." That was it. The missing chair was not mentioned. The canceled meal was not mentioned. No recognition of what we all knew had transpired in that courtyard illuminated by candles. Only $5 for coffee and an empty sentence that reverberated. I chuckled. For the first time in months, I laughed aloud. I took out a big manila folder called Nor Culinary Foundation and placed the card on the edge of my kitchen counter. The signed transfer documents were within. To help ambitious culinary students, I had transferred Harold's whole estate, every last cent of it, into a charitable trust. The ones that made me think of my old interns. The people who addressed me as Ms. Mersley did it with deference rather than a sneer. The trust would fund small business grants, internships, and scholarships for women over 50 who are starting food-related businesses. There would be 5 people on the board. Until the day I died, I would chair it. Not even a backup trustee was mentioned for Corin. Never once has he inquired about the trust, as if entitlement carried legal weight, as if inheritance were a birthright rather than a relationship based on care. He believed it would eventually pass to him. Keep quiet and let him learn. When the paperwork was filed and his name was not listed on the balance sheets, let the attorneys explain. Let him ponder how a woman he had not invited to the table ended up taking the silver, the wine list, every last chair, and the table with her. Online, it began as a whisper. One post from one of Release's visitors, a fashion columnist who had been updating her readers on the Rome trip in real time. The worst birthday supper in the history of Rome. Employees disappeared. No host, no class, no cake, no wine. The post received over 40,000 likes in a single day. Food reviewers, old coworkers, and even some of my former collaborators left comments. Some referred to it as sabotage, while others called it karma. All the wrong motives caused Rylesa's name to become popular. In a week, her site, which was formerly a well-manicured temple to carefree elegance, lost 3 advertisers. She stayed silent after posting a mysterious note regarding unforeseen interruptions. That might be the end of it, I thought. Then I heard someone knock on my door one wet afternoon. Corvin. He appeared older, not worn out or embarrassed. He was wet and clinging to his forehead as he stood there in a light jacket without umbrella hair. "Mom," he continued, "may I enter?" I didn't respond, simply moved aside to allow him to spill onto the parquet floor. He signed his first loan documents while seated at the table where I had previously assisted him in learning flashcards. Now, as though he wasn't sure if he should touch the cup I gave him, he gazed at the steam rising from it. He said, "I know what you did. The supper, the trust, everything. I remained silent. Why would you harm us like that?" I didn't speak louder. I just grabbed up my old planner that was bookmarked with names and notes from years past. I turned to the current week and gestured to the family section at the bottom of the page. It was empty, just a blank line with no names or initials. Corin gazed. He opened his mouth to speak, but I shut the planner before he could find the right words. I then flipped to the next page. They had already filled the next one. 5 color-coded columns. Final interviews for the foundation. Distribution of grants has been confirmed. Gala verified the opening. All of the apprentices lodged. On the agenda, there was only forward space available for him. It was a little dining room, just the scent of slow-roasted rosemary chicken, caramelized onions, and the laughing of folks who had never once asked me for a checkbook. No chandeliers, no imported roses, and no photographers hoping for a brand mention. Now, the 9 apprentices had secretly arranged the evening. I wasn't supposed to do anything. Their only rule had been that. I had instructed them in patience, purposeful plating, balance, and restraint. They silently, reverently returned it all tonight. I hesitated as I stepped inside. The tall, reclaimed pine table was surrounded by mismatched chairs and hand-folded cloth napkins. Additionally, there was a handcrafted seat at the head of the table with my name sewn across a linen sash. A little note with the words, "Lear's slow-braised lamb over lemon farro with herbed yogurt" was placed above my plates. I sat down after crying and laughing. They treated every dish as though it were holy. Ava was the first to raise her glass. For the women who fed futures more than they fed mouths. A retired bus driver who now understood how to make pachu, ladies in their 50s who believed it was too late to start over, and lone fathers learning to bake again were all things I observed. They hadn't inquired about my former spouse. My decisions had not been questioned by them. They were simply aware that I had accepted them while others had not. In reply, I lifted my glass. I was left out of one supper. With a calm voice, I said, "Without them, I constructed 100 more. We exchanged toasts. No paparazzi, no speeches, just the clinking of forks against happiness." I briefly stood by myself at the edge of the empty table later that evening after the dishes had been cleaned and the last of the light had gone out. I was afraid of the same kind of silence, but now that I had discovered something that no folded chair could ever teach me, it felt complete and earned. The seat you provide is the only one that counts.